Is Sarah Langen as well? I don't know if she's in.
Sarah's not here yet.
Okay.
Let me just make sure I had her name. I may not have had her name. No, I didn't have her name to give her a personal invitation. So as people come in here, I'll just find her. Sarah Guest. Let me assume that's her. I'm going to promote her to panelist. Okay, so there's a Sarah there. I hope that's the right Sarah. Sarah, your mic, there you are. Good stuff.
Hey, Sarah. Hi, Heather. How are you? She's here, but not here. Oh, there she is.
Here. I'm here. Yeah.
How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you doing, Jana?
Really well. Really well.
Excellent. Excellent.
Okay, it's 3:45. Jana, should we get started, do you think?
We sure can. Do we have our, oh, we do. We have a whole bunch of people. Thank you for joining us today. So we are focusing today on planning and the new math curriculum. We do want to get started right away because we have a full agenda to get through. So just want to start with our territorial acknowledgement.
We acknowledge that the land on which we are gathered is part of the traditional territory of the Chippewa, Odawa, Potawatomi, and Delaware nations. These indigenous nations, known as the Anishinaabeg and Lenape, agreed through their ancestral languages to the mutual sharing of the land with obligations and responsibilities to the environment. Today, these responsibilities and obligations extend to all peoples.
And I just want to welcome you guys all here. We have a couple guest teachers. Sarah Langen is here from Queenie Chatham. We also have Kate Gillespie. She's from Queenie Sarnia. We thought that was a neat connection. We have Heather Wark here. We'd love to welcome you. And I am Jana, and I am joined by my partner, Kate.
Hi.
And so just to get started, we are talking about the curriculum. So we're going to dig into the actual site of the curriculum a little bit. We're going to look at the key changes document on that site. We're going to show you some helpful tools like the glossary and the teacher supports. We're going to look at a curriculum expectation that we've chosen, and then we'll look a little bit at learning goals and success criteria.
And I just want to add in there that you're certainly welcome to use the chat feature if you want to ask a question or you have something to share, or if you would like to use there's a hands up option. I think that's what we're calling it, a raise hand, sorry, I should say. If you want to do that, then we can see that your hand is raised and you can unmute and ask your question that way. So if you want to participate with us, that would be great. Okay, so here we are, Jana, at the new math curriculum. And some of you, I'm sure most of you have had a little glance at this. We thought we would run through it just to show you some key features we think are important. So if you go here, we're going to first look at grades. And because we're in primary, we thought we would choose grade 2, which is sort of smack dab in the middle there. And then we're going to first look at a specific expectation. So we're going to go to the expectation by strand, which is similar to how the old curriculum was laid out in our book format. And we're going to specifically look at algebra. So we're going to click on the menu on the right. We're going to click algebra over there. And then we have decided that we're going to check out the equations and inequalities subsection. So if we click on the specific expectation there, we come up with these. There's actually 4 expectations that sort of come up in this area. We're going to focus on this one on variables, which is C 2.1, and it's identify when symbols are being used as variables and describe how they are being used. So that is the expectation. And you probably have noticed that with the new curriculum, the expectations all have a specific number associated with them. And that was not as such with the old curriculum. This is more like how the language curriculum is outlined. So now that we have that, we feel like the next place that you would find this expectation is if we go back and look at it from the strand overview. So instead of actually clicking on, we're just going to go back to grades. Yep, and grade 2. And this time we're going to go to the strand overview view versus the expectation by strand, and we're going to find the overview of that strand. And here we are looking at the overview of the specific expectation from grades 1 to 8. So this is kind of a feature that some people may have not used before, or even knew it was available. But this is a great way to sort of see stuff. I'm just wondering if maybe Kate or Sarah or even Heather want to jump in here on how you might use this view in your planning. How do you think you would use this in your planning? Please jump in as you see fit.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Kate, as you guys know. So I teach a grade 3-4, so a little bit older than the grade 2 that we're looking at. But I really like this document because it shows those building blocks they need in order to reach that expectation in grade 3 or 4, as well as what they're going to need for those older grades. So how I can, those skill sets, how I can prepare them, especially with some of the changes like the variables being added in the primary years. It helps me because some of my students are going to have those gaps because they may have not gotten that in grade 1 and 2. So it's important that I go back so that they have those stepping stones to be successful in grade 3 and 4 and onwards. So I find it interesting to just see that whole layout of how they grow from grade 1 all the way up to grade 8 and beyond.
Thanks, Kate. Heather, do you want to jump in here?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to jump in just a little bit. I think, we've done the ministry has done a good job trying to, help us see the progression that might be there for our students. I think it's really important still to remember that even though they've put in some aspects that are developmental, there are sometimes pieces missing in these stages. So it's not purely developmental necessarily. So there might be little pieces that aren't mentioned in the curriculum, but ones that need to be included in order for the expectation at our grade level to be achieved. So as you dig into the curriculum and as you dig into the content areas, we might see some places where we learn through our resources that there's actually something that we need to include even though it's not listed here specifically. So that's something to keep our eye open for.
Yeah, that's great, Heather. Thanks so much. I think that this is a great view. It's trickier in primary to sort of compare because it starts at grade 1, but if you're certainly in the older grades, you would have kids working at different levels, and it's good to see sort of the progression of where they're at. And maybe if they're working, if the skills they have are at grade 5, we don't want to jump right to grade 8 skills. We know that they have to have a progression of how these are going.
Like a certain skill set, right? So that they have to be able to have those skills in order to successfully complete some of the tasks that are, or some of the concepts that are required in grade 6, 7, and 8, right? Did we also notice that the overall expectation is the same from grade 1 through 8? And so that's over the top. And so that's something that's also changed. And so the expectation doesn't change. The overall expectation doesn't.
Yeah, and that's similar to what we have in language, which is one of our newly revised curriculums. So it's kind of good to note that everybody here is working towards the same skill, but it's gradually getting increasingly more complex.
Right. Great way to put it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So the next piece we wanted to show you, and it kind of connects with what Kate was saying, how she was saying that sometimes, I'm going to just go home here. Some of the times what we're seeing is things that are new to the curriculum document or things that have changed. So in the resources section, there is a key changes document. And so under resources, key changes, and this is actually where we went to when we started talking about planning for this workshop, because we wanted to give something that did change. What's really nice about this is it goes through and it talks to you about where the old curriculum is, and then where things might have changed. What we noticed in digging in a little bit to this curriculum, and I would love for you to add if you've used this in a different way than I'm sharing now, but looking at how things change. So we know that in primary, some things have changed. For example, working with numbers, grade 2, we're now working up to 200. So those things have changed. But overall, when we look at the key changes, a lot of the changes are occurring in junior grades and up. So there weren't as many changes in the primary division. One thing that we did note, and the reason that we landed on variables, is that there is some change in the variables. So variables, if I go to it, you'll notice that in 2005, the curriculum, the introducing the variables actually didn't occur until grade 5. I don't think that's not that we didn't do it. So I know as a grade 2 teacher, I was still looking at variables. I probably just never named it variables. And so through our workshop today, you're going to notice that you're probably already doing some of this work. Although it never was a specific expectation, it now is specifically stated in the curriculum starting in grade 1. Is there anybody that wanted to make a special note while I'm on this slide? So if you wanted to raise your hand, maybe share with us some of the ways that this can be helpful for you in your planning, or that has already been helpful, something that you've used it for.
Yeah, I feel like too, this was a document, this is a printable PDF. So a lot of teachers I know at the beginning of the school year sort of had this in their hands to sort of give them the overall picture of what some of the major changes were in the curriculum. So it was kind of a guide. At the beginning, I did see teachers using it as a guide. I'm not sure how much people reference it now, and I'm wondering if there is a spot for that in the planning piece. Like Kate, do you reference this document, or what do you?
So I have gone through it, Kate, because like I had connected with Kate at the start of the year. I believe you were at Queenie that second week of school. So we were getting used to everything. It was kind of a crazy time. And I found the patterning unit to be a little bit more confusing. Now that I'm more into other units, I'm finding the document to be really interesting, and I'm having a lot more success with it. But I guess it was some of the wording I wasn't really understanding. You know, are they supposed to do shrinking patterns in grade 4 or anything? So I was referencing this document just to see if there were specific changes listed in there, which was useful and will continue to be useful. But it's a good reminder for me to keep going back to it as I'm going throughout the year.
Which I think is really interesting. And I think that Heather, you pointed on that just a couple of minutes ago, talking about how it's not explicitly stated anymore from grade to grade. And so you have to be able to know what skills they need in order to be successful with those concepts, but it's not necessarily explicitly stated anymore. Is that what, am I right in that track of thinking, Heather?
Well, it really does still depend on you, the teacher, to understand how a child develops their understanding in a certain content area, because certainly every little bit of knowledge growth that is needed is not necessarily listed. And so we do still need to, dig into the content areas and understand how the child will develop those in order to be able to achieve whatever expectation it is.
Thanks. So that is the key changes document. And again, that is just a printable PDF underneath the resources. And there's a few other ones there. The long range plans are there. And then this is kind of a neat one. I don't know how many of you dug into. We're not going to get into detail today, but the high impact instructional practices is a great document as well.
It's a really good read.
All right, we're going to get back to the curriculum, Kate.
Yeah, and if you go back to the way that we saw that expectation when we looked at this specific expectation by strand.
So we'll go back by strand, and we'll go back to algebra.
Yep. And so this is where we saw it here. And so when we're thinking about, if you want to scroll down for a minute. Yeah.
This one.
Yep. Yep, we're gonna click on that compare grades view. And this is a different kind of view because it's still comparing grades, obviously, but not to all the way to 8. And I know that this is something that maybe people haven't sort of found yet, um, or maybe newly found. And I'm just wondering how this view is sometimes helpful for people when they're planning. It's similar to the grade, all the grades view, but it's specific to this one. So this is kind of nice. So I wonder if like Sarah or Kate want to chime in here on how they might use that. Put you on the spot.
We did.
I can go. I just don't want to. I want Sarah to have a chance as well. So I teach a split grade, most of the classes in our school, and it seems like there's a lot throughout the board that are split. So I do find it useful. Just when I'm looking at this view, it's very user friendly. It's visibly easy to see what they would need to do in grade 3 and 4 because they'd be right beside each other. But then also being able to see that grade 2. So what they need, kind of once again, those building blocks in order to be successful and reach the curriculum at grade level. So I think it's a wonderful view, and I'll definitely, once Kate showed it to me, it kind of was like this big aha moment. And I think for planning for a split grade, it's definitely really awesome. Sarah,
Thanks,
did you wanna add in as well?
Sorry, just learning how to use this. When I use it, it's great for me because I have a 2-3 split, and I actually have some students that are still performing like below a grade 1 level. So this gives me an actual view of what I need to get them to. So they're where to next for like grade 2, grade 3, so I can move them on. I tend to use that when I am planning for my next lesson or for my next strand. So I like the visual of it and how easy it is to follow.
It is. It's like
much more
what
than
comes
the 1
before.
to 8. Yeah, sorry. Much more
No,
than
go ahead.
Sorry, I was just saying much more than the 1 to 8 because like I like that as to see where they need to get to eventually, but this is more focused on the primaries and where I need them to have them for that grade 3. So I like that.
It was kind of it was a little more tricky in the old curriculum because you had to sort of flip to the whole other grade, right? And try and find the expectation that sort of met with the one that you're meeting. So it's kind of nice that they're all even labeled the same, C2.1. And you'll notice in here that some of the words are underlined. And if Jana clicks on that word, it actually pops up with a little built-in glossary, which is sort of moves into our next section. If we go back to the specific expectation, Jana.
It does. Before we do that, I just noticed in the chat that Allison shared that she can also see this being really helpful when modifying programs. So I know we don't modify in primary, but in the older grades, when we have this, you can see what you're covering for your grade level and then what you can do to modify. So following that same expectation for those who just need the lower level.
And like, I think you guys are exactly right. When we're looking at long range planning, you know, you're right, Kate, when you had to flip through the document to look at your other grade, if you're teaching a split grade, and then trying to link those expectations. So both grades are doing something similar, right? So that the lesson is more successful. This is nice that it does make the planning and the long-term planning just that much more clear, I think. And
you can see what the next step is, right? Yeah, that's nice.
And another benefit, if I can jump in too, is, you know, so much of what we're doing as teachers is in the questioning that we're doing in the moment in the classroom, and to be able to, you know, if our students are understanding and are really excelling at the expectation that we thought we were working on, then it gives us a, you know, if we've read ahead, then we know where they're headed to next, and maybe we can layer in some interesting questioning to start getting them thinking about that next level, that next layer that's coming their way next year.
That's so valuable. That's a great point. So thanks for sharing that. That's something that we want to be always thinking about, right? How can we extend the thinking? So here again, underlined words, same thing. It's the glossary is built in here as well. So I can click right on here, and again, the variable word showed up. There are some terms in the new curriculum where some teachers are saying, like, I don't know what this means. And I'm hoping, what I'm noticing about this this site is that they're always adding it to it. So every week I come, something new has been added to it. And we almost feel like when we clicked on the part we want to show you here is this teacher support part. So when you click on the teacher supports, it opens up a whole host of key concepts of things to help the teachers, you guys, to know, okay, so what is it that this means and what do I need to help to teach this effectively? And so, for example, symbols can be used to represent quantities that change or quantities that are unknown. And it actually gives you this. It doesn't necessarily mean that these are going to be specifically things you're going to teach the kids, because I'm not sure that the word variables is in the grade 1 curriculum, but it does talk about quantities that change versus quantities that remain the same. If you choose, like Heather said, to start, if you know your group best, if you know that they're able to handle that concept, then why not give them the words for it, right? Name the math for them.
It is true, but you can't, when I was thinking about this, you can't actually talk about variables unless kids have the understanding that quantities can change and
That's
that they can stay the same. That's sort of like a abstract concept that they may not have thought of. And so this sort of thinking is almost foundational to knowing that the number can change.
That's so right. And there's our note, right there.
Mhm.
Identifying quantities that stay the same and those that can
Mhm.
change will help students understand that concept of variability. So
Mhm.
these notes are here to help and to support. And I'm noticing that the notes are getting larger with
Mhm.
certain expectations.
And I have seen some, as I've sort of perused, that some do give examples of a question or a scenario, which is always helpful, because I know that a lot of us are looking for those samples, and I think that there's more coming and more coming.
Right. And that's, I guess, another point to highlight, that while I know that we love to have that paper copy at our hands, the limitations of printing it off, because you could print this off, but the limitations of printing it, then it doesn't give you the ongoing additions that they're making, or these teacher support links, or the glossary that's in it as well. And that's why they created, I believe, to do it this way, so that they can always add to it. And I know, yeah, they're adding questions, right, Kate? So they're giving us some sample questions to go with that. Heather, do you have anything to add to that?
Well, I think one thing to keep in mind, of course, is that those sample questions are just examples, and there's always more that can be, I guess, looked at, and just to know that sometimes what happens when I've seen in the past, and myself as a teacher, when I had the exemplars or something like that, and I would look at the exemplars and I would do that problem with my students, and that was all wonderful. But then, everyone sort of did those problems and maybe didn't know where to go afterwards. So, leaning on your coaches and whatnot to help of some other places to go other than the one or two sample questions that we might get to help us out.
Well,
And
that is go
yeah,
ahead,
Kate, go ahead.
I was just going to say what I find really useful, like when Kate and I were going through this together, what was really cool for me is seeing how much integration there is, because we get so worried about making sure you're going to fit in all your units by June, but there's so much cross integration happening. Like when we were looking at it, we've been working on word problems in part whole. So we got talking about how we can add variables in there as a next step, as where kind of we want to go. But then we also talked about like the financial literacy can fit in with the variables as well when we're looking at change. And then even in there, I'm noticing coding. So how much of it, is all tied together, and then like that too takes a lot to plan that all out and where you want to go to next with it, because we've got lots of ideas. But I think that those teacher next steps helped me see all of those connections throughout the curriculum document.
Yeah, that's a great point, Kate. And actually, as you were saying that, and as Heather was speaking to, like, there's not just one way that you can lump and cluster expectations together. I think as you work through your years as a teacher and you get to know the curriculum more and more, you see the connections that can be made between strands and between expectations, and then your path. I'm sure that you can speak to that, having taught like the same grade for a few years, that you can sort of see taking different paths, different years, because you can see the connections in a different way. I just want to quickly review what we've gone through so far so that you can see what we've done. So Jana, can you go back to, yep, that first slide. So we wanted to take you to where you find your specific expectation. So that this is sort of your go-to. And then the next one was looking at sort of where does this fit in the overall expectation throughout their year at elementary school. So where is this supposed to be leading to? And then we looked at some key changes. So is this something new? And if so, then I might have to backtrack my thinking quite a few grades to sort of get this up to speed. I'm sure lots of you are thinking about that, and especially like the coding aspect, right? You can't just start in a grade 7 coding without having done any of that. And then this other nice view for planning, which brings you to sort of almost like what Sarah was saying, like just her primary set, which is really nice to look at what they need to know by the end of grade 3, that benchmark for EQAO. And then the supports that are going to help you plan. So here's where we're sort of going to go narrow, and what we thought would be a way that we could meet this expectation. So here, I was talking with my friend Pam Gallant about learning goals and success criteria, and how we would think about how do we meet this learning goal. And so this is a learning goal that we came up with, but it's just an example of how we clustered those expectations together. So this was our learning goal. We were learning how to solve problems using numbers and variables, and some success criteria that we thought the kids had to know in order to meet this. And this is sort of an ongoing document, I guess I would call it. That's hence why I wrote that ... because it's always something you can add on to if Kate decides she wants to take it and do some coding, or if you want to add sort of some financial to it, it's definitely open for doing that. So that sort of helps you guide where you want to take this expectation and what you need to do in order to work up to it.
Awesome. Thank you for that. And so looking at what Heather actually was saying was there are some different resources that we are using, and you might be using some different resources as well. Lots of valuable information in the What to Look For book. A lot of part-whole relationships, which ties in well to the idea of having those variables. Super source activities, right? Using variables that way. We have our Nelson Math, although you'll have to pick and choose, right? There is good stuff in there. You just pick and choose what you want to use and the valuable and how you want to use it. And it gives you a springboard for maybe a way that you could change it that works for your students. And then the guide to effective instruction as well. So the grade 1 curriculum expectation talks about what does quantity mean? How much is there of something? And then looking at them with having discussions with your kids about quantities that stay the same and quantities that change. And so we just have some examples there, like days of the week. There's always going to be 7 days of the week. That's just not going to change. Hours in a day. And these are things that your kids can come up with. You could create a list very similar to the one that was created here. The number of kids in the classroom on a daily basis, that's going to change, right? The number of minutes you sleep at night, that's going to change. When we start talking about quantities in terms of like part-whole relationships, you'll notice at the bottom there that we have those number bonds that we talk about. And so those kids know, students, we're trying to teach them that as one addend or one part changes or grows, increases or decreases, that it's going to affect the other one. And so that's a little bit of variable work in there. And so although it's interesting, so when we were planning for this workshop, I did look at, wow, variables are new. But I looked into the guide to effective instruction, and I noticed it's actually not really that new. It maybe just is a change in the wording as Heather's suggestion. So this is a 2007 document, Guide to Effective Instruction for Patterning in Algebra in Primary. And it talks about these 3 different variable notes. I just want to check my notes to make sure I'm telling you right. So students expand their understanding of the variable from simply seeing it as an unknown, which is that first one, example number 1, to also seeing it as a varying quantity.
So
as
that
an
change
example number
piece.
2. Right. So they're developing an early sense of covariation and number 2. So we're doing this. The primary document for 2007 suggests that the symbols that the students use, so we start to see that word symbol in grade 2, that they've suggested using it as shapes, which I thought was interesting because this was from 2007. And these are examples that I pulled right from that A Guide to Effective Instruction. And then the third type of variables is where this was just one example of the many that were on page 30 about generalizing properties. Numbers can be added in any order without affecting the sum. Heather, is there something you wanted to add to that?
Well, a lot of what you see there, if you're connecting those things to the continuum, what you're going to see is a connection to the key ideas. And so, for example, working with those equalities, which happens when you a little bit older, but as they're investigating, for example, that second one where one number might, maybe you start, they're thinking, okay, well, 5 plus 2 equals 7, but then, you know, maybe 4 plus 3 is also 7. So those quantities can change, that they might be exploring the associative property, for example, or maybe they're working with equivalence themselves. And our students are already doing these things. And this is just a way to represent it without actually putting numbers there. With the bottom one, you know, this is the commutative property we're looking at here. 2 plus 58 is the same as 58 plus 2. And so those are conversations that we have in the classroom. Up until now, we haven't maybe thought about using a symbol to represent the generalized case. We maybe looked at specific instances in our classroom. Oh, look, today we discovered that 6 plus 7 is the same as 7 plus 6. But, you know, as we look at more and more of those, as we explore the commutative property in grade 1, you know, having the I guess the freedom and the thinking about using a symbol to represent the generalized case, it can be useful. The other thing there, as we bring out that beautiful equals sign, is to just a little reminder of pedagogy about saying is the same as, is a really helpful thing for us so that we can be more flexible with how we think about these equalities, which will help our students out in algebra as we go forward.
So Heather, I remember you saying that in a session last year or the year before, and I was like, wow, yeah, I never really thought about that. That whenever the kids see an equal sign, if you ask them, they generally would say, well, that's the answer to an adding question, right? And they don't see that equality and the relationship between those numbers. And so changing it to is the same as, it changes the whole thinking around those equations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's lots of fantastic research you can dig into about some of the misconceptions our students have. And really, it's a matter of changing our practice around a little bit of wording. That being said, we have probably each of us at least 14 or 15 years of schooling that has taught us to say equals or makes or something when we see that symbol, and we have to change our habit to saying something else.
We'll start tomorrow, Kate, you and I. I just wanted to add in here, if you want to go back a slide, I love this specific example you got, but if you can go back to the resource slide, like these are all resources. We listed these because these are the ones that we have in our schools and available to us, and lots of us are familiar with. So it's nice to know that we can go to these and they're still useful for the new curriculum. And I'm sure that there's other resources that people use in their classroom that are good, and they're go-to ones for them too. I don't know if Sarah or Kate, you have like a couple that you love. I know I really like Open Questions by Marion Small. I often reference that one too. I don't know if you guys have a couple you want to share. You can think about it and let me know.
Oh, sorry about that. I signed up for the Math Up to the School Board a couple years back, and I do go through it kind of when I'm planning out my units, and there is some really good like key questions in there and some discussions I can have with the kids that might look at some of the questions a little bit differently or gives me some ideas how to launch off of. But what I liked about it is they did change it for the new curriculum. So there's suggestions at the bottom, and it's kind of like highlighted as to what they've changed and what they've added to support the new curriculum. So it is interesting to go through there and just kind of pick and choose what I can supplement my lessons with. But I like the open-ended questions as well. And the Guide to Effective Instruction has some good problems in it as well that I pull from.
And Number Talks
Sarah,
book is one that we
there?
see a lot
yeah.
too, right? So.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say, I usually use the Supersource. They're amazing for group work activities, but I'm finding this year because of the COVID regulations that it's we're having to look in other places or find alternative ways for the kids to interact with each other safely. So it's kind of learning as you go, I think, right now as well. But I use most of those resources that you have up there. They're really good. So.
Awesome. Thanks, girls. Okay, sorry, Jana, I know I kind of
No worries.
threw us
No.
back a couple slides.
No, so we just thought we'd give you, there's lots of ways that you could tackle this expectations, but it was kind of interesting that Kate and I both in our schools, we were both with the teachers that we're talking about, we have focused on a little bit of numberless word problems. And so I dug into that a little bit. And so numberless word problems, if you've not used them before, they really shift the focus from solving to understanding. And so you'll notice in the examples that Sarah and Kate both have coming up here, that we're really focused on not even looking at the quantities at first, but looking at understanding the problem. But then the students can focus on the context of that problem. And then that starts to support the students in thinking of those variables as quantities that can change, not just unknown or missing values, but as information is added to the problem, then those variables might change. So for example, in Sarah's room, we were looking at some questions like this. And so it's kind of neat because I wasn't able to take pictures of all of it, but Sarah, you can speak to it more. We actually start with like Christopher has some crackers in his lunch and he wants to save some for after school, right? And so kids, it's such a nice way because it's such a low entry, like that low floor, high ceiling type of question that everybody can enter that, right? Everybody in the classroom, regardless of where they're at in their development of number, they could add in numbers that works for them to make sense of the problem. Sarah, did you want to talk a little bit about these?
Yeah, so like the discussion that it creates is amazing because they start to add different values that they think would fit into those numbers. And then what my next step was for math, and we talked about, because Jana, I got to work with her as the instructional coach in my room. My students were having a really hard time understanding what the question was asking them to do. They always want to add. So just trying to get them to look at the question without any numbers and kind of decide what we need to do, what information do we have, what information do we need to have to solve the problem, created a lot of discussion. And then it kind of, I know you could see some of the lights turn on in some of the kids, like, oh, I don't know if I should add or if I should subtract. So we liked it in that sense, that it got them to think about what they have to do with each of the problems. So then as we added the numbers, we would stop and kind of have them discuss, okay, what could happen now? And naming the numbers. So when we did Elijah has 12 blue balloons, we made sure that when we were doing the part whole, that we were labeling it with the color blue. So we're giving that number a name, right? So it's a value of how many blue balloons. And then with the orange with the 13. What else? And the numberless word problems, they lend themselves right to doing the variables, right? So that you could change the numbers, or you could change what a question is really about and just use the same numbers as well. So there's different ways that you could use the variables. So it's kind of hitting quite a few different expectations for the math stream. And I know in December, this is like, if you follow the expectations for the curriculum, that the ministry has on their website, that's going to be the next ones for December. So some of these are great ideas where you can hit quite a few of your expectations.
Yeah, and what's really neat, and I wasn't able to get a picture, now hindsight, I wish I was, but I was working with a class as well where, let's take Elijah's problem, right? And you have some blue and some orange, but then you switch that because now you've said 13 orange, but they still don't know the blue, but they know that they now have 25 altogether. So that changes, and it's neat the way kids can alter their thinking to change the size of the part the more information they're given. And that really goes and lends to the understanding of the context of these problems. Mm-hmm. And so I love working in this way with the kids. You'll notice on the one with Christopher, some of the kids were able to add on, and they were adding up in chunks, whereas another student might choose to count back. And it's so neat with that flexibility of strategies. I didn't show you this before, Heather. What do you think of some of this?
Yeah, I love all these different problem types. You know me well enough to know that. And problem types, changing up the problem type, like in this, the one that you were talking about where they start with some and then they have they have some and then there's 13. How many does he have altogether? He has 25 altogether. How many did he have at the beginning? That kind of thing. That type of question really helps them to think very differently about problems than when they have you know, as it's written here with the 12 plus 13, this very familiar structure. And so it's fun too to be able to play around with smaller numbers or number combinations. So for example, if I could do like a quick little, let's say number sequence problem, like a little number talk at the beginning, and just prime my numbers so that I know that they might remember that relationship later and be able to draw on it to help them out. And then it's less daunting a little bit for them to change the formatting. So just a little something.
And this is, I did slip the slide there, but if I look at the slide before, I did reference what Heather's talking about. There is a lot of information in these what to look for books. They're in every building. You probably have one in your classroom, but it really talks about those different types of questions. So I know growing up, I don't think I ever remember getting one where it wasn't just the result unknown, right? And you're talking about do the start unknown, do the change unknown, the separate problems. These are all the types of questions that we're now giving kids, and it's so incredible to see their thinking in the way that they plan to tackle using the different part-whole relationships, right?
Exactly. And so I believe that's chapter 3 in there. If you're looking for it, you can dig into, there's actually 11 different additive problem types that you can play around with your students that helps to develop the algebraic reasoning that underpins where they're going to go with algebra.
So what's really interesting is, although that key changes document tells us that variables are new and the algebraic thinking is new, it's really not new. I think that we're doing a lot of this in our classroom. It's just we're now giving an actual expectation and a name to it.
Well, I was even noticing on that next slide, you already have everything that you need there. You just, the question mark is a symbol that represents an unknown quantity. And so we've been doing that for a long time. It's either a box or a question mark. But really that's what that's really, I guess it could be a letter, but it can also be just something else.
Thanks for that. All right, Kate, this is some of the work that you were doing with Kate, right? And you were talking about combining the strands. I don't know, Kate, did you want to talk about this?
Yeah, well, listening to you and Sarah, it's funny because we kind of are all doing the same thing and not having planned that ahead of time. Because when I first came, like we're not actually working towards that variable strand, but all the work that Kate has done leading up to this using number talks and word problem dissection, which is what you've been doing this week, right, Kate? That you can see how it could lend itself. And I just listed all these expectations that I thought we could meet, that we're meeting this week alone, without even having to do it, because we can't teach expectations in isolation. We have to combine them in order to do them efficiently. And there's a lot of like crossover, right? So here's where you're able to see that kind of stuff. But in order to meet that variable expectation, if indeed that's where you want to go, there's so much backtracking you have to do. So Kate, you can share a little bit about what we did this week and what you think, where it's going, you think, because I'm leaving you tomorrow.
No, I don't want you to go. So it's been a great week with Kate, and it's definitely been a lot of aha moments for myself as well as the students. Like, so I was struggling in here, similar to what Sarah had said, where the kids just see the numbers and they just want to add them right away without actually stopping and thinking. So we've done a lot of the like visualizing, what's the problem asking you, verbalizing, okay, let's explain it, like what picture you're creating in your head, and then using that part-whole mat to try to dissect the problem. So we did this same as Sarah, where we didn't have numbers in it at first, and that was Kate's suggestion, and it was really wonderful to see. It was a struggle at first for the kids, I'm not gonna lie, and then to see their progress in a few days has been really incredible. And some of the questions the kids have asked as well, like thinking that the question mark always has to be in the hole. And then us having that discussion, well, does it? Or can the unknown be somewhere else? And all that stuff that you might think a student, we take for granted that we know that, but to him, that was a fact, that the question mark always goes in the hole, even though he knew the two parts add to the whole. Well, I don't know the whole. So it was really neat to see that, and then having the class discussions and hopefully clearing up some of that misunderstanding for other students as well. So where I'd like to go with it originally, my plan was the financial literacy, and as well using that part-whole as an idea, as going off of making change, because I know that that's going to be challenging for my group, is that some of the changes in the financial literacy, but now I'm also really thinking about those variables because it lends so nicely in there. So that might be something we'll have to talk about. Kate?
Well, and even at the beginning, when we first started the part whole mat, we started with 10 and different ways to make 10. And then we had our blocks out, we were making 210, then we did it with 100. And so we have images of the kids actually making their own. It was almost like filling in their own variables. Like if we had actually got to the point where we could put a number at the top and then have two symbols, they could figure out what those two symbols were. And we did practice that actually a lot at the beginning. We gave them numbers and they had to figure out, so if you had 40, what could you give? You could have 39 and 1 or 38 and 2.
Mm-hmm.
And so they were actually playing around with that kind of idea before we even brought up the variable part as a bit of a diagnostic to what they could, how they decompose numbers.
And then one, like what's really neat is we had the kids create their own problems, and it was really interesting. Like a lot of them did do joining, but then there were a lot where they had different unknowns. And there was a really interesting one about a parking lot. So we're cars, there was 150 cars, 55 of them are parked, how many are moving? So it was neat to see which students could really understand what we had been doing and challenge themselves to think of a little bit more complex problems. And then we actually pulled some of those problems today to work with the kids on. And I think that was pretty neat too, to see how much they've learned in a few days.
Well, and my thought on the whole of is that if I'm thinking about, and I'm thinking about this workshop and thinking about variables, and it's like variables might be the end game, and there's so much build up to do that, but look at all the expectations we're meeting, and like it all kind of coincides and overlaps together. So
it does, and you're, like you said earlier, Kate, we're not teaching in isolation. Look at those expectations that we're covering all just with this, right? Those are 7 different expectations that you've been able to cluster together.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for sharing, Kate and Sarah.
All right. Well, Kate.
Heather, do you want to add anything else in there?
Well, I did have something. I know we're at the end, but one thing that Kate said that I think is really valuable for us to keep in mind as educators is she was talking about one of her students who had thought up until now that the question mark always was going to be in like the whole or in the result. And one of the things that we know about how students learn is that they don't only learn from what we tell them, they actually make up rules that may or may not be true based on just what the examples that they've seen. And if they haven't seen any counter examples, then they make up a rule like it's always like this, or I thought it was always had to be like this. And it's only because they haven't seen counter examples to that. And so they sort of make up these rules that are actually not really true rules. And so part of what we have to do as teachers is to know what some of those things are. And this is one of them, that unknown is always in the result. And these types of problems can help be counterexamples to that misbelief or for lack of a better word, that the question mark is always in the result.
And so, Heather, as you say that, I'm like, this session is on the new math curriculum and planning. And yes, there are some key things that we showed you at the beginning that are useful tools that are built in the curriculum to help you plan. But when it comes really down to the everyday, like Kate and I, every day after the lesson happens, we're like, okay, so now what? Right? So we have sort of this success criteria and we know where we want to go, but listening to the kids and seeing what their misconceptions are, it leads us to the next day planning, knowing that it's all working towards this end goal. So that sort of immediate planning within that long range planning is where sort of your best teacher practices and your responsive teaching comes in, and that's kind of that's the hardest part and actually takes the most work because you're really thinking about how are the kids thinking about it without them telling you. So
it is the bulk of the work, you know. Figuring out what you're going to do today or tomorrow is a time consuming, but it's actually sort of one of the smaller pieces of what you're going to do that's going to impact, you know, all that questioning, knowing how students' thinking develops inside that expectation, requires us to know the developmental continuum for that specific area of mathematics, and then being able to target our discussion and our questioning specifically to those areas
Mm-hmm.
and our experiences that we're putting in front of the kids.
Well, ladies, we are over time. I would love to say a wonderful thank you to Heather for joining us again. It's always a pleasure, and I have greatly loved working with you. Kate and Sarah, thank you so much for joining in the discussion as well and sharing some ideas that some of the things that you're doing in your classroom. We know that you're both doing great things, and that's why we invited you to come and join. You will notice that Kate's email is there. My email is not there. So Kate, if you have any questions, you can email Catherine.allison@LKDSB. Kate, do you have anything you wanted to add to that before we?
So we are kind of having a follow-up session to this session in January. So you'll get an email about that. And Heather's going to be joining us again. And I hope to have some guest teachers again. And that it will be primary focused again. We're going to do it by division. So we hope to see you to work more with the curriculum and how it fits in with other things that we're teaching in our room. That would be great to see you. And if you're interested more in the learning goals and the success criteria, then we have a couple sessions coming up in January as well that are helpful, because this sort of is easy way to get comments into your report card, because it is what you're learning.
Kate, I did notice a question in the chat. I would have answered it, but I don't know the answer myself. From Jessica, she's asking if virtual teachers have what to look for available to them.
That is a good question. They are definitely in all of the schools, but I think that it should be available for you. So I will definitely look into that.
I will look into that for sure. What they do have, right, is the e-text available to them when the book is purchased. So that inside cover has that e-text availability. I'll just have to see what the virtual school has available to them, and we can look into that for sure, Jess. And yes, Pam shared daily reflection and responsive planning is the most important. So she seconds that. Don't forget our blog. So we did put our blog there as well just before we leave. And all the resources right on demand there. We have lots of videos to share and lots of resources on the blog as well.
Thanks again, ladies, for joining us, Heather, Kate, and Sarah. And thank you, Rod, for behind the scenes.
No worries.